Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and we have with us Cannondale and TrainerRoad's Amber Pierce.
Good morning.
And our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everyone.
And we started darn near on time at 8 a.m. I think that we were 3 or 2 seconds after. That's pretty darn good. Good for us. Proud of us. Way to go, team. Today, we're going to answer the questions that you have submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast. Please go there. Submit those questions. Any questions that you have about training, about human physiology. Today, we're going to talk about blood flow restriction training, if it's something that we should work on and incorporate it into our training regime. We're going to talk about whether cold weather starts cramping or not. We might even talk about snails and base layers, some strange stuff. It'll be awesome. I even want to ask you, Chad, a little bit about, because I feel like we haven't talked to you about this, but the spring classics, the races have been going on, and I want to find out what things have caught your eye amidst all of it, because it's been a really exciting racing, not just in the spring classics, but just early season in general. It's been really good. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's been fascinating so far. I'm a little disappointed that they've flipped around Amstel with Paris-Roubaix, because April 1st, first weekend in April is typically that. And it's basically my Christmas. I mean, it's the biggest thing on my annual calendar. I very much look forward to it. But Amstel is a good substitute, and Paris-Roubaix is still going to happen. It's not going to get canceled like it did last year or year before. Yeah. But just certain revelations. I mean, it's fun to watch Wout van Aert dominate, but it's also fun when he can't make it, because then the race just opens up and it's entirely unpredictable. That's super fun. And then this isn't classics, but I'm watching the Itzulia in
to the Basque Country, right?
Yeah, Basque Country,
and before,
and just watching Remco actually be a worker for the team and some of his lead out so far. If you haven't seen him, I don't want to spoil it, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
So this is just a wonderful time of year, because there's so much bike racing going on. I mean, it's almost too much to keep up with.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's good stuff, and it gives Amber all these fantastic flashbacks. It's good stuff.
It's hard to watch races now without getting like a full body adrenaline rush. Like it's just a Pavlovian response now.
That'd be cool, because you've done it. It's got to be so different for you watching it, knowing what the Koppenberg feels. Or I guess back then they didn't have the women do the Koppenberg. Is that right? Or which climb did they have out of the Flanders race?
Koppenberg. No, we did Koppenberg.
Sweet. It was one of the climbs. They didn't have it in the women's race. I think this year was the first time they had it in there. So
we usually do most of them. Yeah.
It's pretty sweet.
It's not as long, but we just do like the hard part.
I like how they had the women finish after the men this time, instead of because it seemed like the crowd was there a bit more.
There was perhaps a huge crowd. Yeah. It was massive
when they do it before. So, and what a finish in the women's race too. It was like,
amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So exciting.
Yeah. Anywho, if you like racing, it isn't all about racing, but just the same, it's always fun to enjoy and watch. I have one feature I want to talk about. If you go onto TrainerRoad and you look at or trainerroad.com and you're looking at a workout on the website, you can hit a button that says open an app. And then what that will do is, if you're on your phone, and then it'll just open up the TrainerRoad app or anything else. And so then that way it's more connected. It's been a small feature that's been requested for quite some time, thanks to our awesome team. I think the growth team built that out. Is that right, Amber?
Yeah, growth team. Yeah. Shout out growth team.
David and crew. Thanks a bunch.
Yes.
Awesome stuff. All right. I want to get into the deep dive. Sean says, does blood flow restriction or BFR, or blood flow restriction training, known as BFR, prior to this, at some point, was it known as occlusion training too, Chad, or a separate thing?
Yeah, I think that term has fallen out of favor, maybe because it implies full occlusion. I don't know. They steered away from it for whatever reason. I don't see it. And all the papers I covered in prep for this, I don't think I saw it one time. I saw percentages of occlusion, but I never saw it referred to as blood flow occlusion.
Got it. So blood flow restriction, or if you've heard it as occlusion, that's what we're talking about. And Sean asks, does it benefit an endurance athlete? There's another question that we got from Callum on this. Do us age groupers need it? Can it help benefit time crunched athletes to get better endurance gains, or are the effects short-lived? And then another question from John, and I promise this is not me, Chad, said, would wearing BFR bands on, say, and we'll describe how you do this, and that will make sense in a second, but would wearing BFR bands on, say, Pettit for 30 minutes be a good strategy for maximizing time and building strength? So lots of questions around this, but Chad, can you explain what this is first? First, from the perspective of like what an athlete does, like physically what you do to make this happen. And then we can talk about what goes on in the body a bit.
Yeah.
I think Maxine actually might even bring up some images where I have my legs wrapped up, by the way. So you can see this very thing.
Cool. So you experimented with this, did you?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, I used Voodoo floss bands, which I'm sure you'll talk about. But I've used Voodoo floss bands for various different reasons, like for stripping the muscle from the fascia and trying to do that and moving it through range of motion and PT and everything else. So same tool can be used for this, right, Chad?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to play it fast and loose, shoot from the hip, as it were. I don't know that I go that route based on what I've learned so far. But hey, we'll get to all that. So yeah, what is it in the first case? So blood flow restriction training, BFRT, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's training while you're restricting blood flow, and you do it via the use of an inflatable cuff. Is one method. Broadly, it's referred to as a tourniquet. Use a tourniquet of some manner, and it could be an elastic band, it can be an elastic bandage, it could be a Voodoo band, which is an elastic band, and you basically put it on what's termed the proximal portion of the limb. So basically, it's going to be your arm or your leg, and you're going to put it as high toward the incoming blood flow as possible. So way up on the thigh or way up on the arm. And then what it does is it partially restricts the arterial inflow. So incoming blood is partially restricted, and it fully restricts the venous outflow, the outflowing blood. So with regards to the atrial inflow, or not atrial, arterial inflow, you're trying to restrict the blood flow into the muscle, and in doing so, you actually exacerbate what exercise pretty much already does. When we think of things like, we get less phosphocreatine in, more lactate accumulation, and you're also accumulating other metabolites and other things that are lowering the blood or the muscle pH at that point. And it incurs what's termed in some papers as muscle toxicity. And this happens during exercise too. And this is what spurs the peripheral adaptation, the adaptations in the muscles that we're after. And a particular interest and targeted over many things is the bump in mitochondrial biogenesis. So we know that more mitochondria lead to greater aerobic capacity. And this is achieved through these what are called homeostatic perturbations. So anytime we disturb homeostasis, the body's attempt to return to it can supercompensate or overcompensate, so that the next time it's not as daunting as a insult. And so when we have these perturbations, it increases the enzymatic activity that leads to greater signaling pathways and all that AMPK, PGC1 alpha, all those things that lead to more mitochondria and greater oxidative capacity to start to take place. With regards to the venous, exactly. Oh, it totally is too. Yeah. I know.
Thanks for waiting through all this, Chad.
I know.
And then putting the Da Vinci Code here. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's actually quite interesting. It's just probably best kept up here and not spewed out so that everyone's only confused by it. And then with regards to the outflow, so the venous outflow, this is more about when the restriction is released. So the rapid outflow that takes place at that point results in a substantial increase in the rate of blood flow. And this can actually bump up to threefold or more of what happens when you're not restricting blood flow. And what this does, one of the things it does is encourage angiogenesis, which is the formation of new blood vessels. So when we talk about muscle capillarization, increase tiny little blood vessels that allow oxygen perfusion to the muscle. Well, that's angiogenesis. That's what we're looking for. And this results from the shear stress that happens with this, this influx of blood and the actual velocity of the blood flow.
Quick question. So the shear stress on the actual arterial walls or the venous walls, and the return of that's super interesting.
Yeah,
cool.
which does a couple things. It can actually make the vessels themselves larger. There was a study that pointed to a larger interior diameter of the femoral artery. And it can also improve the suppleness or just the health of the blood vessels themselves, the endothelial tissue.
Cool.
In addition to this, and this isn't necessarily on the angiogenesis side, but there's a reduced oxygen tension, because you think about it, I mean, less and less oxygen's coming in, the muscle's using the oxygen tension drops, and this results in hypoxia. And as we know from talking about altitude training, hypoxia spurs its own set of adaptations. So, and if any of this is of particular interest, again, this was like 30 plus studies. I don't want to link to all those studies and just bomb our producer with links that they have to share with everybody. I just cited the 4 most important information-rich papers. And one of them was a 2020 review looking at the influence on mitochondrial biogenesis and the angiogenesis. So that'll be linked if you want to dig further. And then, so let's talk about the cuff itself. It can actually cause muscle cell swelling, which is actually exacerbated by the muscle contractions. So, we get, and this is bone density, but I mean, some of the things that strength training yields is, adaptations that are a result of this compression on the bone in this case. So my point is that when the cells swell and we further that swelling or the pressure on the muscles via contraction, other things are spurred into action. And then there's also increased mechanical stress on the heart. So we can actually incur central adaptations. So adaptations in the cardiovascular system, specifically the cardio end of that, the heart itself.
Chad, can I ask a quick question on this? Because this sounds like training without training. Like it sounds like all the benefits you're talking about are because many of these things are what happen. They're one of the many things, or they're some of the many things that happen when you're training, right? All the things that you're talking about right now. So this sounds like to me, wrap my leg up or put on an inflatable cuff, sit on the couch, and I get the gains that I'm going for and without the hard work.
To a degree. Yeah. I mean, this has been used and we'll get to, what sort of people can make use of it. And that's kind of true, but it's kind of not, especially if you're a conditioned athlete who needs to maintain what you've already got, just piling on to, sedentary or a bedridden fella. Sure. You're an active fella who's already incurred a certain amount of physiologic adaptation.
Yeah, because I should also state that it also sounds too good to be true.
I was just going to say the same thing. Like, this all sounds amazing. Like, are there any drawbacks?
What do you think, Amber? If you get pro cyclist again without any training, just wrap your leg up and you're good. So, yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty sweet.
So, Chad, where's the fly in the ointment here?
Well, so let's talk about what the purported benefits are. And really, I say purported, but I'm only going to talk about the research validated ones. So there's at least some research to back up anything that I'm going to discuss right now. Otherwise, it's just a waste of our time. So really simply, it is purported and research validated to increase muscle size, so hypertrophy, muscle strength, muscle endurance, and it does it all at low intensities. To get a bit more specific and still evidence, you get increases in fiber type recruitment. So it can get pretty specific about which fibers it recruits. We'll talk about that. It can stimulate muscle protein synthesis. We talked about the angiogenesis and mitochondrial proliferation. It can enhance antioxidant function, because you think about it and you're bombing this pent up muscle with oxidants over and over and over. Well, that stimulates a higher return of antioxidant function, which can lead to, amongst other things, an improvement in glucose uptake in the muscle, which is super relevant for endurance athletes. We talked about blood flow too, both the artery diameter and the healthy vascular tissue inside. And of course, what we're all super concerned with is overall performance. All these things do translate. The research has translated them to actual performance improvements. And all these things occur at minimal power output, reduced neuromuscular strain, and according to some studies, reductions in RPE, but that does not carry at all. In fact, in most cases, the RPE is increased. And we'll talk about, you've already alluded to it, Jonathan. I mean, you wrap a rubber band around your leg and tie off blood flow. It's not a comfortable thing. Exercising along with that, it's not going to be comfortable. So I find it really hard to believe the RPE dropped in any cases, unless they were just getting it wrong, unless they just didn't have the pressure right.
Amber, you had something and I had something.
I just wanted to point out that that's a really important point, that sometimes we can find a mechanism where, let's take a random example, something increases muscle size, that doesn't necessarily translate to performance benefits. So what Chad just mentioned, that we see these specific mechanistic outcomes and that those do and have been shown to translate to actual performance outcomes is a really key point to make here, because that's not always the case.
And that's going to be a recurring theme across everything else that I have to share.
Yeah. The other question that I had, and it's just a clarifying one, Chad, because perhaps this could be misunderstood. You were talking about those benefits and you were saying that those benefits were achieved at low intensity. And I just want to make sure that, are we talking about the benefits are only experienced by the athlete when riding at a low intensity? Or are you saying that when applying BFR training in conjunction with low intensity training, these are the things that happen?
The latter.
Great. Cool.
Yep.
Awesome.
So the work itself is done at low intensities. It can be done at high intensities too. And we'll talk about that, but there's a shift in the strategy.
Can you imagine like going out and doing sprints?
No, it's exactly what we'll talk about.
Chad, I don't want to just speaking from personal experience. And first of all, I had the Voodoo floss bands. I don't know if Maxine has been showing this for y'all to see, but I had really long bands because those bands are used I was using those to like wrap my entire quadricep and even like lower leg and skip out on the knee and then run through range of motion, that sort of stuff. So this is not the
different
ideal
objective
way to do BFR. You'll see mine is located toward the upper portion of my quad, right up into my hip and in my groin. And it goes down too far for this. You don't need to go down that far, but still putting it on like that, not even wrapping it too tight, extremely uncomfortable to pedal through. Like your legs just feel like gigantic balloons when you do this, because like Chad said, you're cutting off flow. So you're trapping things within those legs, and boy, it's really uncomfortable. So even thinking how this athlete, in this case, John said, pet it for 30 minutes. I would not want to do this for 30 minutes even.
Doesn't need to either.
Yeah. So it is very, it's not comfortable. I think we should probably get that out of the way, and you probably shouldn't.
First and foremost,
don't go and do sprints with these.
Yeah. The claim on RPE and comfort. No, that is not
RPE
something
was
that
way up too. For me, anecdotally, this is not a study, but I was like, even walking, I'm like, yeah, walking is miserable. So like, it's not, I don't know. That's N equals 1 though. So.
Okay. So I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm going to go into this in more detail, but let's just answer the question straight out. Can it be beneficial to endurance athletes? And this is one of the 4 papers that I linked to, which is a 2018 systematic review, looked at 14 studies, and yes, just on young athletes, but 11 of the studies looked at aerobic exercise. The others were strength or I think walking, but for whatever, it had to be considered aerobic. So anyway, 11 of them were aerobic exercise. 6 of them specifically were cycling. Of the 14 total studies, or maybe the 11 studies on the aerobic side, 8 of them showed improvements in VO2 max, which already there's a mechanism. So there's a mechanistic reply. Does it translate to performance? We'll talk. All 11 of them showed improvement in aerobic endurance performance measures. So whether or not they got an improvement in VO2 max, they all saw improvements in actual performance. So which, who cares what's behind the scenes? They performed better. It's a win. So, and also this is widely applicable. And this is a bit of a teaser regarding the promise. And I say promise that blood flow restriction training holds. And we'll get to that in more detail. So let's, talk about methods.
Let's do it.
BFRT.
Yeah.
Okay. So blood flow restriction exercise. Let's ask the question: can endurance athletes benefit from it, and how? What methods do they use? So just laid out that yes, there's evidence that they can. So how do they go about it? Really, you can go about it in a number of ways. You just have to shift, as I mentioned earlier, the strategy depending on the intensity. So if you're doing low intensity or moderate intensity, this seems to be the consensus recommendation. I mean, you can do high intensity stuff, but keeping the intensity low to moderate is the way, especially for endurance athletes, where everybody seems to land. When it comes to high intensity training, high intensity interval training, the jury's out. Adding blood flow restriction to high intensity interval training in one study showed no further improvement over HIIT. So high intensity interval training was already what it needed to be. Adding the blood flow restriction didn't increase it, at least in that study. If it is added, the blood flow restriction is actually applied similarly to the way you would do it in sprint interval training. So we're already high intensity. Now we're going a little beyond that and talking about sprint intensity. And this is typically 30-second all-out sprints, 4.5 minutes recovery. That's a really standard protocol. And what they found was an increase in VO2 max. They also got an increase in something called a hypoxia-inducible factor, which is, you push hypoxia on the muscle, you get manifestations of these different enzymes and proteins and signaling cascades, et cetera. And this led to increases in capillarization, one of the things we look for, but it didn't lead to an increase in 15K TT performance. But I say that and take that with a grain of salt, because 15K can be a heavily anaerobic affair. So it may not be the best measure of aerobic improvement. And this particular study saw other criticisms. Sample size was a bit small. Study duration wasn't quite long enough, according to certain critics. And then the absolute they used absolute blood flow restriction cuff pressure. So, and this is one of the concerns that I'm talking, when you mentioned using bands, you really have no idea what sort of occlusion percentage you're hitting. So in this case, because they used the same pressure across all subjects, they had muscle oxygenation variances of 11 to 43%. So some muscles were getting well more oxygen than other muscles. So it's really hard to make an apples to apples comparison when some muscles are comparatively being flooded with oxygen and others are being, pretty much starved of it.
And that's across individuals, not within a single individual, like differences in muscles within one individual, but we're looking at differences in oxygenation individual to individual. Between subjects. Yeah.
Yeah. Individual to individual.
Right?
Yep.
Any legs.
Yep.
And there, to get to what you're talking about, Chad, there's bands that you can do, but that's really tricky to guess on where you're going to be at. There are products that actually you can try to dial in specific pressure.
And that would have to be the way to go.
Right. And even then,
otherwise it's a total guessing game, unless you've used that initially so that you know what that pressure feels like and then kind of ballpark it based on that. Even then, I'd rather that you could see exactly what you're working with. I am at 130 millimoles of mercury, and now I'm going to start my interval.
Yeah, because the tricky part with that too is that, like, if you're going by one that's like pressure, so if you're looking at like, bar or PSI or anything like that, then clamping force, who knows, like Chad might actually require a ton of clamping force because he's jacked, whereas me, maybe not as much, or I don't know, or just different arrangements of where the cuff's at. Like it's all those things are going to have a profound impact. And
I don't know how it works. I don't think I didn't get into what pressures fit what circumstances. And that's actually one of the points I want to make. This is kind of tricky stuff. But when it comes to not so much high intensity interval training, because they were doing the hard work with the levels of occlusion restriction, but with sprint interval training, where you do 30 seconds all out, it was basically the sprint was done and then the restriction was applied immediately post. So you do the sprint in full blood flow and then you occlude the blood. And this is when during that recovery valley. So in the case of the sprint protocol, 4.5 minute recoveries, the first 2 minutes, they'd slap a cuff on, dial it up to 130 millimoles mercury. So just think of a blood pressure cuff up to 130, leave it there for 2 minutes, take it off. They got 2 more minutes of recovery. Then they'd repeat the next sprint.
Okay, that makes. I kept making faces because I was imagining doing sprints with the cuffs on, and I was just thinking that is awful.
It's been done.
Imagine your 7th sprint.
Imagine your first. I mean, that just sounds horrible, and apparently not productive. But so just a little more on the sprint intensity training. A couple studies from 2016 and 17 used well-trained cyclists with at least 60 VO2 maxes. So pretty fit riders, 4 weeks of supplementary sprint intensity training with BFR. So they added this. And of course they did the restriction during the recovery valleys, as I just described. And they saw VO2 max increases between 5 and 6%. What's more important is they saw an increase in their max aerobic power of about 3 to 4%. And ask me, if you get an increase in aerobic power, you get an increase in performance. It's going to translate.
How much of that, Chad, did the researchers note anything about, like, were they going through this training protocol otherwise without the blood flow restriction training?
Yeah, and all of these have controls. I don't use.
Yeah, were they able to like measure the improvement outside of that? Because that's huge. Like if we're talking if you had 3 to 4%, Chad,
this is in addition to
national championships you would have won.
Oh, anybody. That's a huge bump.
If you had 3 to 4%, I mean, we're talking, you suddenly are no longer a super domestique. You're the one the team is riding for.
You work really hard for a fraction of a percent. Yeah.
Because so that's that's always an alarm bell when I see like a study that says that like this intervention caused a huge increase. Because then in that case, it's like, well, then if I apply it, I should see a notable big change, and everybody else should, and everybody should be doing it. And I always wonder if it's like, is the training causing the improvement, or is it Is it really just the actual intervention of this blood flow restriction?
Well, in this case, that's what their literature does support. And you do have to consider this is a 5 to 6% increase in VO2 max, which then translates to only a 3 to 4% increase in max aerobic power, which is, the percentage of that max aerobic power at which you can work is going to depend on so many other factors, your FTP, your lactic clearance,
Sure.
I mean, all the things. And
This
and
isn't
then
like time.
how much
this
of
isn't
that?
like time on a 40K. We're not talking 3 to 4%.
No, because that would be the next step down that ladder, where it translates to a 0.5% in performance. So it's just because you get these big changes in VO2 max doesn't mean you're going to get these big changes in performance outcome. But
translation
if you're working with more power,
outcome.
Exactly. If you're working with more power, you're going to see some uptick in performance. It's going to be measurable. And so the literature does say that this is pretty much the most widely accepted blood flow restriction approach for trained athletes. And that'll bring me to the next thing. But the recurring theme, and I saw this in a lot of papers, and I should say, I mean, this dates back to, I think the earliest paper I saw was 2011. So we're talking 10 years, but there was a drought of research on this until the last couple of years. So this is relatively new territory. We're talking 2019, 20, 21 is where most of the research is. A couple studies coming out now, and I'm sure more is going on right now because this holds a lot of promise. But the recurring theme, and this one I'll quote from this study, was more work is required to translate laboratory findings to real world applications. And that's an important point to keep in mind throughout. These are all lab findings. Maybe they'll translate to real world to degrees. Maybe this will be just the next big thing because it works so well. Maybe it won't bear out. There's promise though.
That makes sense.
I've heard that there's they're like entire centers. I believe it was in Germany. They have these where you go and it's a blood flow restriction training center. And I don't doubt that. It's not about doing big lifts. It's not about running super fast or cycling super hard. And it's like an average person gym. And this is just like a training intervention that's used.
And that makes perfect sense, because if professionals have a good handle on what they're trying to achieve, what the limitations are, how specific this needs to be, that it makes sense to have a center for it. You go to there, they do the thing, and then you go away and you do your thing, because you can control the other things. It's the other forms of training are much more straightforward than how this highly technical avenue is.
And I want to recap one thing. You were talking about a training intervention that had you applying the seclusion approach during recovery valleys, not during the efforts, right? Is that the one where
when it comes to sprint intensity training?
One?
And that's what they typically steer toward trained athletes. But the less trained, the moderately trained, the immobile, actually what we're going to talk about right now, because Caitlin's question, and you summed it up. You said, can it benefit time crunched athletes to get better endurance gains, or are the effects short-lived? So I use this as an opportunity to talk about who's best served by blood flow restriction training. So, and it turns out pretty much everybody: untrained, trained, elite, immobilized, strength athletes, endurance athletes. It's across the board. There's science to support it benefiting everybody in small ways and in bigger ways. So when it comes to strength athletes, it's been applied, and I think this is where it all started. Really, is they started with strength athletes and then kind of ported it over into the endurance realm. But they use it with failure training, non-failure training. You have immobilized athletes who are rehabbing, who need to simply avoid atrophy, maybe not even trying to maintain anything so much as not maintaining any performance end of things so much as not lose muscle mass. Physical therapy athletes, it's all pretty straightforward. And when it comes to those physical therapy athletes, I did come across one review of 35 studies. And this is just with regards to the safety of this form of training. And this is done in a PT environment, right? So it is monitored. Right. But over these 35 studies, they found no detrimental outcomes. Point being, it can be managed, and we know it can be effective, or we've seen that it can be effective. So again, just a strong case for actually going somewhere to have it done for you. And then when it comes to injured athletes, and obviously like someone who's trying to rehab a collarbone, makes perfect sense, right? I mean, they can't really throw their weight into the bike, so they can't do the high power repeats, but with a bit of blood flow occlusion training, working at 30% of what they'd normally do, they can get a lot of the benefits that they'd get otherwise. So it's the same effective intensity at lower stress loads. And then even in the case of someone with knee osteoarthritis, this was a case study, but they did a 9-week intervention, did it a couple times a week, 30% of max power, and they gradually ramped the duration from 12 minutes to 24 minutes over those 9 weeks. And what they found, or what they achieved, was a significant or a substantial. Oh no, I didn't know what they achieved, unfortunately, but they did see an improvement. And the fact is that they grew the duration from 12 minutes to 24 minutes. So the significant or the substantial implications, improvements, sorry, I can't read my own notes here. Substantial improvements almost entirely across the board. So the point is, everything they measured, and I didn't go into detail with what they measured. The fact is, this athlete had knee osteoarthritis, actual knee issues, and managed to improve all measures of performance, the ones that they did measure, over this 9-week intervention. So it's, again, broadly applicable. Think about tapering, or really athletes who are just in a maintenance phase. And this could, I guess, apply to time-restricted athletes. They do low-intensity blood flow restricted training in place of their high-intensity training, which basically allows them to ditch the intensity and the recovery course that comes with it and keep the adaptations. So there's probably an application there. When it comes to time-restricted, I'm a little hesitant because high-intensity interval training is still, without blood flow restriction, that is, still works wonders for maintenance. So if you're time compressed, I don't know why you would shift to this rather than just keep on doing short, highly intense workouts. Then when it comes to trained and well-trained athletes, I mean, strength athletes, we've seen just example after example of increased muscle hypertrophy and muscle strength. And I think this might be the best application for supplementing your training, because these athletes may already be pushing up against what their bodies can compensate for, can recover from. So if you add a little low load training, low muscle damage in the process, could be an excellent supplementary avenue. And then one of the other papers I linked to is a 2021 Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research narrative review on blood flow restriction for endurance athletes specifically. And this paper, I included the link because it has all the gory details, all the different ways you can skin this particular cat. And it shines a light on the differences in training approaches and differences in the outcomes, the magnitudes, the underlying mechanisms. So when you change one thing, you need to understand the things that change with that change. And they also put an upper restriction on the time using it at 40 to 80% of supine arterial occlusion pressure. So again, this speaks to the technical nature of this, but they limited it at 20 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week. So we're not talking about hopping on the saddle and doing pedit at whatever, even at 40% of occlusion for 30 minutes at a time, when they're maxing it out. The current recommendation anyway, according to this review, which is super recent, is 20 minutes. And you can do it a few times a week, but it's not done for long durations at a time. And then, so nutshell here is that blood flow restriction training can be highly effective even in well-trained. And then let's move on to the highly trained, or the elite. One particularly interesting study looked at powerlifters, and they did a couple blocks over 6 weeks, low load, blood flow restricted front squats. And they got increases in their quad cross-sectional area, so bigger muscles in already very strong folks. Increased hypertrophy and increased myonuclear addition. So, muscle cells can only grow so large. They need to add nuclei to grow larger. They achieved this with blood flow restriction training, but they only saw it in type 1 fibers, which is pretty interesting. And the reasoning being is that they typically train only with heavy loads, right? Which target the type 2s. So basically, it's kind of a form of type 1 neglect. So this said, they didn't see an increase in strength. And that kind of plays out too, if you think about it, because they don't use those type 2 fibers. So who cares if they got bigger? They're not employing them when it comes to powerlifting, which is a bummer for them, but a huge boon for us, because we do use type 1 fibers. And if our type 1 fibers get bigger and have greater aerobic work capacity, well, that's a huge win for endurance athletes.
I have 2 questions on that study. Can I ask really quick? You may not know the answer to them if it's, but I want to ask them. So number one, do you know when they measured that? Like the cross-sectional area of the muscle? Was this like a long way disconnected after the exercise itself?
I doubt it. If I recall, it was done at 6 weeks. They may have done one that was post 6 weeks.
Cool.
But no, I'm pretty sure it was just immediately post.
Because one of the things that we've talked about is, when you use this, that your legs do physically in that moment swell. And I just want to make sure that people aren't thinking that the like researchers like waited until their legs swelled up and then measured the cross-sectional area.
Yeah, but that'd be edema. They're actually measuring cross-sectional area of the muscle fiber
itself, not looking at just the quad, the upper leg being big. I just wanted to clarify that part.
Yeah.
The next thing,
the actual muscle fibers, not just the cross-section of the thigh itself, but the fibers within the thigh.
Yeah. Now this one is probably going to, this is asking for your best guess, Chad, but when you talked about type 2 versus type 1, and you talked about the neglect that they have because they're just working at heavy loads and these short explosive movements that they're doing compared to these endurance athletes, could it just be that the BFR was raising the average? And since that was so low, it was just picking up what's hanging down low, so to speak, in terms of those type 1 fibers not getting enough, or type 1.
Yeah,
and
I think
as a result, in endurance athletes, did they see if there's a change going the other way? Like, do endurance athletes just see an increase in type 2 because they don't work those fibers enough?
No, I don't think the loads are high enough to actually do anything to the type 2s. I based on what I've read, I mean, this is not a hard answer or a hard, fast answer. I can't say this for sure. But if the force levels are low, it makes sense that the fibers that are going to get recruited are low force fibers. So,
right.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at.
That's a good question. That's beyond me. I can't answer that.
And what I'm trying to get at here is that people are listening to this right now and they're buying whatever products are on the internet because they want to use this because it's the secret to getting faster and it's going to absolutely do everything. And that's like, and whenever I read about anything on a study and I read the title of a study and I go, boom, like, okay, I'm doing it, whatever it is, without looking at actually thinking this through. Because I want people to, I mean, we already have somebody in the chat saying like, this is how I'm going to get the veins on my quads I've always wanted. Like people, people want to jump in and do something that's going to give them a huge amount of improvement. Maybe. And it's totally understandable. But it's really important to understand the improvements appropriately in context. So forgive me for asking the questions that you may not even have the answers for, but I just want to pose a critical eye to all of this so then we can understand it better.
Yeah, no, it was actually a good question. I wish I did have an answer for it, but that's not something I quite can wrap my brain around, at least not in the moment. Maybe if I thought about it more. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so let me just wrap up elites really quick. They also looked at rowers, which is a little more in line with cyclists, and they used young males and females. They had them do it 3 times a week, and all they did was 2 times 10 minutes blood flow restriction for a total of 60 minutes per week. So again, kind of staying within those confines, those recommended confines. They did it for 5 weeks, and the intensity was really low. We're talking less than 2 millimoles of lactate per liter of blood. So that's low. I mean, if we talk about threshold or onset of blood lactate being 4, that gives you some idea. It's around there. That's not a hard number by no means, but talking low intensity training. And what they saw was, in their words, remarkable increases in VO2 max, averaging around 9%. These are elite level rowers, and they got a 9% bump. That's ridiculous. So again,
that's wild.
This isn't, I'm going to do this now because holy heck, it's going to work. This is much promise. So, and then let's wrap it up with older and younger athletes. Endurance athletes specifically, it works for both, but the adaptations actually shift from predominantly central. So for whatever reason, younger athletes seem to see more central adaptations, whereas older athletes seem to see more predominantly peripheral adaptations. So in the muscle. So still see the benefits, still see a lot of the times the performance translation, it just comes about via different mechanisms or different targets of adaptation.
Is that age difference similar for well-trained versus elite?
I don't know.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I kind of wonder if it's a similar like low-hanging fruit, whereas if in older folks, there's low-hanging fruit in terms of muscle health, whereas if you're younger and you have healthier, more muscle mass, maybe that's, there's less to be improved there and more.
Yeah, that's a super good question. Yeah. Yep. So
cool research directions.
Kind of on this. Oh, for sure.
And it is a new area of research too. So a lot of these questions still have yet to be answered. It makes sense. Research, if only it could happen in a day. It doesn't happen that quick. So
sadly, but it is ongoing right now. And this is a hot topic. So expect to see a lot more emerging information. Emerging research. So knowing its wide applicability, I think the real question, and I think one of the 3 questions actually asked this is, do I augment my training or do I replace my training with this? And I'm just going to say quite simply, and I'm going to kind of punt this to a 2021 Journal of Applied Physiology review that says, and I quote, "The incorporation of BFR exercise into training of strength and endurance trained athletes has recently, my emphasis, recently, the last couple of years, been shown to provide additive training effects that augment skeletal muscle and cardiovascular adaptations." So at no point has this really been discussed as a replacement for anything you're currently doing, so much as a supplementary or additive form of training. So just like anything else, altitude training, heat training, this is something you have to pile on top of it. And that'll bring me, kind of tease me up for a point I want to make a little bit later. This is another form of stress, so it has to be accommodated. So with regards to adding blood flow restriction to easy rides, one of the questions, we didn't specifically say this, but John said, would wearing BFR bands on, say, Pettit, we pretty much covered that, but he also noted a Texas A&M 5K run study showed improvement by walking with them on as you're training for a 5K run. So, that, and I think this is where the too good to be true. It's like, I can just put these on and walk and actually see improvements. Well, yeah, at least one study and this does date back to 2010, used walk training with blood flow restriction training, and they yield muscle hypertrophy. So the muscles got a bit bigger, and all they did were 5 3-minute walks slowly on a 5% grade, rested for a minute, did this a couple times a day, 6 weeks, or 6 times a week for 2 weeks. And they got significant increases in VO2 max. So the research takeaway being that it is useful rehabbing athletes, and it's useful for rehabbing athletes and for improvements in VO2 max. My takeaway is that it requires high consistency. And yes, it is low effort stress. There is a maintenance application here for sure. But in this case, they did a heck of a lot of it. So yeah, it applied to walking, but they had to do a lot of walking under, blood flow restriction. So really all that's left is, now I kind of want to shine a light on the difficulties of engaging in blood flow restriction training, because everything sounds so good, it's all rosy. I want to do this, I'm going to get faster, I'm going to get more muscular, all the promises it holds are going to manifest in me because I'm just going to wad a band around my leg and do some low intensity efforts. It's unfortunately it's not that straightforward, at least not yet. Maybe over time, you can bet specific devices will emerge that facilitate this whole process and make it more manageable. So first off, I mentioned this already, but different attributes of blood flow restriction training can alter and greatly at times the outcomes, the magnitudes of change, the underlying physiological bases. So everything from the type of exercise you do. Is it continuous? Is it interval? Is it intermittent or continuous on the occlusion side of things? What are the cuff pressures? Because they can range anywhere from 50, or in these studies, range from 50 to 240 millimoles of mercury. The cuff size too can affect it. So one example is, for instance, oxidative stress between intermittent and continuous restriction varies. So therefore the adaptations do too. So the takeaway here is that the research on your end is absolutely advisable in order to know what exactly it is you're pursuing. Second difficulty is that both muscle activation and neuromuscular fatigue vary relative to the BFR intensity. So just how intense are you getting with your blood flow restriction? One takeaway being is that individual determination of the vascular restriction level is crucial. And that's that AOP I mentioned earlier. And I think it's also referred to as the LOP. It's a limb occlusion pressure. Another takeaway is that different intensities yield different adaptive outcomes. I already touched on that, but this is along those lines as well. There is a bump in RPE and sensation of pain in just about every study I looked at that looked at RPE. If they didn't look at RPE, they couldn't comment on it, but you can bet it was probably still there. And it was even as high intensity interval training comparisons. So even though they were working at much lower loads, the discomfort, the RPE was just as high. On top of it, you have the cuff pressure and you're performing muscle contractions. I mean, we talked about this. It's just not going to be comfortable. And then also heart rate and VO2 tend to be higher. So your oxygen uptake, your respiration rate, your heart rate tend to escalate when you're using blood flow restriction as opposed to not. And this is a big one, significantly higher delayed onset muscle soreness up to 48 hours post. Well, this doesn't mean it's going to happen every time you do it, but it does happen. So depending on the intensity, you could be setting yourself up for some for some muscle soreness, even though all you're doing is really low intensity work. Then the cuff pressure and the cuff width. So the pressure, the recommendation is 40 to 80% of the arterial occlusion pressure. And you calculate that by basically cutting off blood flow. So, if you were to put a cuff on and, pump it up to a point where blood flow ceased, then that's 100% occlusion. So now you're working at 40 to 80% of those levels. This doesn't sound like something people should do on their own. I mean, it just doesn't.
I was not well calibrated when I'm wrapping my leg up.
And you lived, you're okay. You didn't lose a limb, so it didn't go too badly. The width of the cuff actually matters too. Wider cuffs require less pressure. So which is kind of a little bit of a steering toward using wider cuffs, so you don't have to flirt with potentially dangerous pressures. The exercise load, volume, the recovery durations, the frequency, changes in any of these can affect the training outcomes. And this is the fourth paper that I linked to, which is a 2019 blood flow restriction exercise position stand. And this ranged across labs from UK to Australia to Texas and Mississippi, Denmark, Brazil, Qatar, Spain. So a lot of people weighed in on this paper. And it shows you that you tweak any one of those things, and now you steer the adaptation this way. You face these limitations, and I don't want to say dangers exactly, because none of them really demonstrated any severe dangers, although there are a couple of points I'll make in just a second here. And then another difficulty is the periodization of blood flow restriction training. It's in its earliest stages. They don't know exactly when to slot it in. So this is something that is yet to be clarified. And that brings me to the final point, which is that this is early days, and quantifying the physiological stress is likely to be difficult, which in turn is going to make managing your training load difficult. The recommendation thus far is to quantify any BFR training completely separately from everything else you do. So, which has its own set of complications. And then I'll the couple more points. First off, is it dangerous? Back in 2010, they had the research was promising with respect to safety outcomes, their words. But again, this is early days. Probably the most prominent incident or prominent danger that I saw across the papers was there's large incidents of numbness following the blood flow restriction training. I mean, it's transient. It's not like you're stuck with it for the rest of the day, or certainly not permanently. Then when it comes to complete arterial occlusion, completely cutting off blood flow, well, clearly that's going to carry its own risks and consequences. So obviously don't want to push things too far. But most of these threats are actually mitigated with the use of a higher quality tourniquet, which again says these devices are going to start to crop up. You watch. And in the meantime, blood pressure cuffs, a high quality blood pressure cuff, so you actually know what pressure you're working with. Placement shouldn't be anywhere other than high arm or high thigh. And then this form of training is absolutely off the table if you have any history of thrombosis, any form of infection in a limb, cancer, diabetes, all of which just points to be sensible. If you had a recent crash and you have open wounds on your leg, maybe table the blood flow restriction training for a little while.
Maybe.
These are the things we have to tell ourselves because we're kind of dense.
And then
we're just chasing performance gains.
Totally.
Athletes, yep.
I feel it needs to be said. So there it is.
Yeah.
Responsible. Yeah.
And then, so all this sounds highly technical. So I just want to end this with one non-technical approach to this. And there's actually a fun side note to this study that I just came across. It doesn't necessarily, well, it does fold in. It's gravity-induced blood flow restriction. And basically, they just elevated the legs above or kept them below heart level. And they did this on a recumbent bike. So what they got was reduced muscle oxygenation, but not reduced muscle activation. So we got a little bit of hypoxic exposure, and this led to significant increases in that AMPK signaling, which leads to further expression of PGC1 alpha, more mitochondria, all that. So we got the mitochondrial proliferation we so desperately seek. And the question was it due to the cell swelling or the hypoxia? The cuff on top of the cells that get mashed up against it, was that the culprit, or was it indeed the hypoxia? But basically, this can be utilized by recumbent riders. If you have a recumbent bike,
I was just going to say,
set your bike
hang
up.
your recumbent on a wall.
Totally. No, that's what they did. That's exactly what they did. And then, and if you're just a poor rehabbing athlete, if you can get access to someone's recumbent setup, this could be an excellent way to rehab. Just elevate just put your legs a little bit higher than your heart, a little bit of hypoxia, keep the intensity low. But the fun side note was that if the mild muscle hypoxia is actually to blame, say maybe that is the benefit or what's bringing about the benefit, then could this tie to the whole legs up approach that has benefited athletes for years, or that the people still tout? So you put your legs up, you get a little bit of lymph drainage, muscles, blood doesn't pool, it just feels better. That's all good and fine. But what if over the long term, you're actually forcing a mild hypoxia on your muscles and gaining more mitochondria as a result, thus improving performance, which you're attributing to exactly, right?
That's
Who knows?
Cool.
Mind blown.
Maybe there's
the old
something
school logic is true. There's science behind it.
Maybe,
we're not saying that. We're just saying maybe. Yeah.
Maybe just a little outside of the box, but
interesting.
Possible. Okay, now I'm closing for real. So I just, and I want to close formally and say that this is not an endorsement on our part, due simply to the complexity and its relative newness. This is new territory, last couple of years. So, and to further this, you're not going to learn what you need to know to engage in blood flow restricted training in a single podcast. We could talk about this for the entire podcast. You're still not going to go away being able to jump into this. The intricacies are many, and each of them can affect the outcome. So do recognize the promise and expect more findings, expect more specific recommendations for real world applications in the months and years ahead. But again, this is still new territory.
Amber, do you have thoughts you want to share? I have thoughts for sure, but
go for it. Share the thoughts.
Okay. This is, so if you level the playing field and you just think of you're chasing improvement in performance, there are many different ways that you can do that. We've talked about so many of them on this podcast, whether it's on the nutrition side of things, whether it's on the recovery and like off the bike, or whether it's on the bike. There's truly many, many different ways in all these different categories to bring about performance improvement. And a lot of the time what we do is we find a new idea, but it takes something that is currently a leading improvement or performance improver for us, and we compromise it by introducing something new. So I'll share an appropriate example of this. Blood flow restriction training. And we're like, fantastic. Well, right now I'm training for cyclocross. I'm doing a whole lot of really high intensity training. So I'm going to keep that thing on when I do the high intensity training. That high intensity training may be the main driver right now for you to get faster. And then when you bring something else in, it could blunt the effect of that or compromise the effect of that. A great example of this too is when people talk about fasting or anything else like that, and they think, well, I'm going to starve myself to improve body composition, which usually doesn't work out. But what it absolutely does, almost certainly, is compromises your ability to train effectively. And this is a really, I think, just a general note for all of us. There's so many different things that we can do to try to improve our performance, but we should always look at them on an even playing field and say, which ones are the most achievable? Which ones are the most effective? And am I having any damaging crosstalk between all the different things that I'm doing? And if you look at it in that regard, like caffeine, it improves performance, but take it too late, it's going to affect sleep, and that affects performance. So you always just have to look at like the net gains and losses and try to balance that checkbook so that you're letting the leading things that are going to have the most impact do the most. It's like Chad very well said and clearly said, this may be a great thing to do as a supplement, possibly, if done correctly, to your training, but it shouldn't compromise your training. And that's definitely a big temptation and an easy thing to fall into that I have stepped into many times.
The sad fact of that is it's so easy to misattribute changes in performance, improvements in performance. So you're doing all the right things, and then you add this one thing and your performance continues to improve because of all the underlying things, not necessarily this new addition. But what are you going to give credit to is this new addition, because these new improvements have to be as a result of the thing that I just changed, when they might be due to the things that you haven't changed, the things that you've been doing consistently up until that point.
And there's that compounding effect, right, Amber? You've experienced that. I mean, you having so much time swimming and then transitioning into cycling, it probably took you years to really see the compounding effects of it really starting to add up. Like, the consistency pays off. And the thing that you've added in the last week, to think that that's to blame instead of looking at the months of work that you've been doing beforehand is kind of crazy, but our mind does that all the time.
Yeah, it's really easy to get fixated on the marginal gains, so to speak, and lose sight of how important the basics are. So it's fun to chase these kind of novel ideas because it feels new and exciting, and like maybe this is the new silver bullet. But those basics are the things that are really going to make the biggest difference. And so I would just, like you mentioned, there are so many things that you can do, but there are only so many things you can do in a day, right? And most of us have things other than training going on. So adding one more thing, adding one more thing, adding one more thing, if that gets to a point where it starts to compromise the basics that are really the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of your training adaptations, that's something worth stepping back and looking at. And the other thing on this one, I'm just going to, for a moment, because I think a lot of people's minds go to, well, if it's this good, then more must be better. So just, Chad mentions some important caveats here, and this is probably one of those situations where more might not be better. Just the fact that you would have an increase in delayed onset muscle soreness is a big one, because that could compromise the quality of your training for days after doing a session like this. Would what you would have gained on those training sessions have improved your performance more than the session on blood flow occlusion training? Who knows? But you don't want to compromise those basics. So I would just add that little caveat here as well.
As time has gone on, I have stopped searching for ways to add stress and to increase RPE. And I have definitely shifted my focus to find ways to decrease RPE in particular. Like if I can introduce things that decrease RPE, that helps me train more consistently. And that's a huge improvement. That's like a measured, if I can be consistent, that's one of the biggest drivers in terms of performance. So anything that raises RPE these days, I tend to like drift away from that. And I try to find ways to make it easy, because if it's easy, then it's completable. And as, as basic as that sounds, well, if I do more, then I'll be doing better. It's kind of basic, but it's true. And kit companies, get at me. I've already got ideas. It's going to make your bibs really hard to get on, but I'm sure bib companies are going to come up with like extremely tight things around your groin and around the top of your hips. I can see it already in the bib shorts, because we had a suggestion in there. Why not just buy extremely small bib shorts as an option? So yeah.
I've accidentally had to do that, by the way, being one of the taller, bigger riders on the teams. Whenever my luggage didn't make it, borrowing kit from my teammates who were teeny tiny. Not fun. I'm just gonna say it's not performance enhancing in the moment in real time.
And as Sean alluded to in the chat too, probably bad for your tan lines, no doubt. So yeah, which is an absolute driver of performance. Chad, break from the deep dive. I want to talk a little bit about the host challenges. So we, on a previous week when you weren't here, we talked about host challenges and races that we wanted to do. And I wanted to ask you, which ones are of interest to you? Which ones do you want to do? Because Ivy and I are doing Tahoe Trail 100. I really want to do a thing where it's Ivy and you on a team, Chad, and then Amber and I on a team at Tahoe Trail 100, or some sort of relay mountain bike race that isn't highly technical like that. Because I bet that would be like really close. Like, I bet it'd be awesome. It'd be a cool thing to see. But what events interest you? What do you want to do, Chad?
Well, you got a nice list of them here. I can just go through them and say yay or nay.
Yeah, I'll read them and you say yay or nay. And if you want to tell me why, you can. If not, you don't have to tell me anything.
Well, I have to embellish. It's not very interesting otherwise. Yes,
I agree. Tetanus pay dirt.
Yeah, that one we actually signed up for, and then it got called off, and I was very keen on doing it. And I'd do it this year, weren't it for the fact that the travel window is an impossible one. So I can't swing it this year, but I'd like to do it next year.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Tahoe Trail 100 also.
For sure.
Yeah. Have you done it before?
Amber? No, we had to bail out. I think it was a smoke thing. I don't remember what it was.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that didn't happen, but I'm fully into it. I think it's just be a good opportunity for just a hard ride, because you can just bury yourself. It's not technical. It's long. Yeah. And if we do it as a relay, it could actually be fun.
You stay on the gas for a mountain bike race. That one I can think of like one spot where you coast. 2 spots where you coast. Like you're just on the gas all day.
Good training day. Yeah.
Totally. Yep. Iceman cometh. That
Hard
was
no. Nothing about that looks appealing. I don't go out when it's like 58 degrees. I'm certainly not going to do it when it's freezing and snowing and no.
They're going. So that race has incredibly devout fans. They're already rage typing on their keyboard, Chad, to let you know that it was 70 degrees like for 2 years at this race. And it wasn't really cold, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee for that because there are other times when it's snowing and it's freezing cold. So it would be fun. It's a big one. That one is you're on the gas the whole time too. It's basically like a road race on skinny dirt roads, so to speak. So yeah. Triple bypass in Colorado, the huge Century thing.
I'm actually interested in doing that this year. I think it would probably beat me up really badly, but I think we have free entries to it, comped entries, right?
I don't know. Yeah,
I think so. And then it slots into my schedule nicely. So whether the fitness is there or not, I may take a crack at that. You guys up for that?
I want to see if you cramp or not, Chad. That's because that was a thing that you had, because like you said, it might put you through the ringer.
It is time wise. I've got some time to train, and I've been training a bit. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Next one is Peaks Challenge. That's that. It's like basically like the Death Ride, but in Australia. When you look at the profile, it's not far off of that.
That's kind of cool. An opportunity to go to Australia is reason enough to be interested in that one.
All right. Rooted Vermont.
I don't know. I feel like that's Amber's neck of the woods. She'd probably be into it.
Oh yeah, Amber's in.
I'm going.
What's the course like?
I actually haven't had a chance to do it yet.
Okay.
The year I was going to do it, I actually got really sick, and then it was called up the following year. Super fun gravel. I'll be party in the back. That's they do a mullet protocol, so it's business in the front, party in the back. So join me on the party train.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a good time.
That's certainly interesting.
My friend Tom Sampson from Velocio, he like loves that event. That was his first gravel event he did last year. He's ex-pro XC racer, enduro guy, really, really good rider. And he said that was one of the funnest times he's had on a bike. He loved it. So
super good vibes. Cool. Yeah.
All right, let's put that one high on the list then.
Unbound, Chad.
Hard pass.
Unbound XL. Just joking.
Harder pass.
High Cascades 100. It's a cross-country marathon mountain bike race in Bend.
No, I like so much about it except for the 100 miles, because the Tahoe Trail 100 is 100K, which I can get behind, especially if I'm doing half of it. High Cascades just sounds like a repeat of what was our 100-mile jobber, where I basically fell off the bike and laid on the side of the road for a half an hour.
With Levi's Gran Fondo, maybe?
No, it was a
Lost and Found.
Lost and Found. Yeah, which good day up until about the 6.5 hour mark.
I remember being
not looking to recreate that.
Wondering where you were and asking people, because people would recognize you, and asking people like, "Did you see Chad?" And everyone was like, "No, I did not see Chad." Turns out Chad was just laying down somewhere.
I was out of sight. The where I was laying was lower than the road. Strategically.
Send out the search party for Chad. Swiss Epic.
Couldn't not. I mean, I couldn't pass that up. That's an opportunity to go to Switzerland and ride mountain bikes. So even if I just fell apart, I'd have to go.
I've heard it's hard, like really steep and long sustained steep climbing. Like 20% is just like what you do.
Maybe I just go and bail out the first day and go ride socially for 6 days. Maybe
they get an e-bike category, Chad.
Ooh.
There we go. That'd be pretty sweet.
That could be fun.
Yeah. Single track 6. Do you yearn to go back, Chad?
I do not. No, I'm still scarred.
Yeah.
It's such good mountain biking, but I don't want to do 6 days of it in a row on very hard trails.
I cannot wait to do it again next year, hopefully. So another 40K TT challenge to get another crack, Chad, at a fast time.
Super interested. And the one of the questions we have coming up is about TT positioning, and it got me digging into it again, and it kind of rekindled the fire. So I'm into it, but I need a bike.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this with Nate, but if we did it, we should go to that New Mexico course. It's supposed to be the fastest course. So we should find like a grading and paving company, and I don't know, you can buy them a round of beers and they'll just pave the whole thing for us, Chad. I'm sure that'll work. Are you interested in like a bike packing thing, Chad? Camping with carrying your tent along a route?
Not really. I mean, at first blush, not really. I mean, it might, if I thought about it more, might be something that sounds kind of fun. If I did something like that, I'd want Emirates to go along. I wouldn't, I'd want to make it a little more social.
You've watched Top Gear, right, Chad?
No, sadly.
Okay.
No.
Well, Top Gear, the old school show, it gets guys that they are not keen on camping, yet they are camping. And that's basically the entire funny part of the show. Is that
Good.
Me traveling,
I want to provide
Chad,
comic relief for.
I know that you're a fan of discomfort. When you want to be comfortable when we're traveling and when we're sleeping and we have good travel, like nice lodging, not excessive, just nice, just not bad. And I think that the comedic content could be off the charts if we had you bike packing with us. I think it could be.
That kind of makes it interesting. Yeah,
no doubt. We were thinking of having Nate.
Threatening comic relief. That's our specialty.
Exactly.
We might just have to tell everybody, trust us, it was really funny. Yeah. Like we cannot air what he was saying, but trust us, it was really funny. I was thinking that even better, Chad, because I know that this would be adding to a worse nightmare for you. I was thinking along the ways on this bike packing trip, we could have Nate pose like specific challenges for us and checkpoints along the way. So like, to make it even more interesting, kind of an amazing race sort of thing, if you will.
Oh, I like the creativity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be funny. Everybody that's listening to this, if you have events, let us know. We're putting them on the calendar. Ivy and I are signed up. We're doing the relay at Tahoe Trail 100. Amber still has her little one, so she can't just like take off and do a bike packing trip for a long time. It doesn't really work that way when you have a small child.
Not right now, no.
But Amber's going to be at Route of Vermont, and then over time we're going to have even more race opportunities. So let us know. TrainerRoad.com/podcast. Okay. David has a question, and I want to talk about, we talked about this, bringing in too many things that actually cross signals and then blunt effects when we're talking about how to get faster on the bike. Same thing happens with nutrition. This question was specific for me, but I just wanted to cover it because we do get a lot of questions that are similar to this. He says, I was wondering if you could tell me how you planned your on-the-bike nutrition with the MAR10 products during Cape Epic. So for what it's worth too, I want to make sure that people understand this is not like sponsored or anything else. I mix my own drink mix because it's cheap and it's achievable for me rather than having to buy it all the time because that would be really expensive. I used MAR10 in this case because I thought it was a bad idea to fly with a bunch of bags, Ziploc bags of white powder to a different country. Figured there's no way I was going to get through all the systems of checks. So that's why I brought them. He says, I have a 4-day mountain bike marathon race here in Belgium in May, and I've just started using these MAR10 products, which basically just sugar and salt, glucose and fructose in a 2-to-1 ratio. And it's really simple. And he says, and I'm trying to average 100 grams of carbs an hour, but my question with this is, when do you take in caffeine gels before the race? And of course, after about how many hours after the bike do you have to worry about this? And then what do you take in after the bike? The whole question. And I want to cover this because sometimes you get so fixated on carbs that you forget about electrolytes. Chad, I think you and I have had this discussion when we were in Hawaii, just like sweating profusely on the bike. Taking in carbs, but not taking in electrolytes. And you can absolutely focus on one thing to such a degree that you don't realize that you're missing out on the other. Then caffeine can introduce dehydration. If you're not used to taking in caffeine, like I am, a caffeine gel absolutely like puts me on the ropes. Like I'm revved, I'm pinned at the red line when I take those sort of things. So you have to be considerate of that. And then if you're doing a stage race, then you can't sleep because you just took in caffeine. So you really do have to think it through. The one thing I just wanted to say on this is that whatever you do, work your way up to 100 grams of carbohydrate, but don't let that come at the cost of taking in electrolytes. A lot of people, it depends on what you do. You can check with companies like Precision Hydration, and they have like testing kits, I think, or they may just do in-person testing. I think Gatorade has like testing kits that you can get to find out how much sodium you lose. That could be a good benchmark to understand then how much you should take in per hour. And whether you take that in capsules, whether you take that in a drink and mix it in with your carbohydrate mix, whatever it is, just don't let carbohydrate and electrolyte be mutually exclusive. You can take both and make sure that you're taking both. So that's a good just reminder. And the last thing on caffeine, I have personally this is just me, and I'm curious to hear your two opinions on this. If it's a stage race, I do not take caffeine, and I would allow it on the last day, but I'm not going to do it in the other days. And the reason for that is because me not being a habitual consumer of caffeine, it makes it so that I just do not sleep. It's so hard for me to sleep. It messes up my gut. And it causes other problems that, sure, it may allow me increased focus and may lower RPE during the race, but then it causes a whole host of issues that when I have to race the next day are just too complex for me. Do y'all have rules with caffeine and stage races, Amber? I don't know if you have any habits with it that you'd like to share.
My only rule is pretty basic, which is just to not overdo it. So when I was grabbing gels for the day on whatever stage it was, I would only have one or two among them that had caffeine in them. And I would be a little bit strategic about when I would take those, usually a little bit later in the race. But I am a habitual caffeine drinker. I drink coffee every day. So it doesn't have an outsized impact on my sleep. But I did have teammates who were for whom caffeine had a much stronger effect on sleep. And everybody metabolizes caffeine a little bit differently, depends on what your tolerance is. So it's really important to experiment with that, I think, ahead of time, and know yourself, know how that's going to affect you, and plan accordingly as you do. Because even just there's a huge difference between its effect on you and its effect on me, which translates to how we plan that into our nutrition for a race like that.
Mm-hmm. Good tips. Chad, anything to add to that?
I've never really modulated caffeine, just which is on the brighter side, might mean I still have that arrow in my quiver, so to speak. But if I were to go about it, I would, try to abstain from caffeine and then reintroduce it when it mattered. But that's the catch. That washout period is something that I feel is beyond me. I did it once for a diet, like a cleanse diet, probably a decade ago. And I learned a lot of lessons that day, but I won't say day. It actually lasted like a week. I hung in there for a little while. It was supposed to be a 4-week endeavor, I think. But anyway, the caffeine washout was just brutal. It broke me. It made everything else about it so difficult, and kind of affected me to a point where I don't think I'll ever consider it again. I'm a lifer when it comes to caffeine, coffee specifically.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Same thing, not for detox, but I was just experimenting with caffeine for racing, right? And so I did a similar thing, abstained for a while to see if I could have a higher impact of the caffeine on race day, which I absolutely did. It definitely had a much higher impact on performance that day, but it was so miserable. It completely compromised and trashed the quality of my training for the weeks leading up to that event, to the point where I realized I'm better off just using it on a daily basis. For me personally, I'm better off using it on a daily basis because it helps me function at a higher level and train better. And I felt like the benefit that I got from increasing that quality of training on a daily basis was going to be a lot more than what I saw on race day after abstaining. So that was an interesting experiment to do, and it has helped me not second guess my approach later on.
That's a great example of looking at like the net effect of something rather than just focusing on it in the single moment, but looking at it at a larger scale. Yeah. For what it's worth, the one thing that I have found with caffeine is like, so there's a lot of different gum brands that do this. Rev Gum, I think, is one. Run Gum is one. I've only used Run Gum, and it's pretty low dose caffeine, relatively speaking. And it seems to come on quick, not hit me as hard, and then also fade quicker as well.
I've had the same experience with the Rev Gum
as well. Yeah. And I have no clue if once again, N equals 1, right? So this is not some sort of science saying that when taken in with gum, it, comes on quicker, isn't as severe, and goes away faster. That's just my experience. That's all I'm saying here. And Chad's echoing that. But so I took that in on the last day of Cape Epic. And then because I was like, I don't care if I sleep tonight, like, I don't care if my stomach hurts, like it's the last day. Like, I just want to go. Man, I had a good day on that last day. So there you go. But I don't think it was just the gum. One, in terms of how I worked it out, David, in this case, I first looked at like, okay, per hour, here's the grams of carbohydrates I want to hit. Now, how do I divide that up across my bottles and across my hydration pack? And how am I going to make sure I hit it? after going to a few aid stations and our bottles just like not being there, I was like, okay, I'm not going to count on that anymore. I'm just going to carry my hydration pack and that will be sorted. So I just knew that in my hydration pack, I would do that. And then I took in capsules to take care of my electrolytes. Every single hour, I took in 250 milligrams through a small precision hydration capsule. They're in blister packs. So then if I was sweaty and everything else, it wasn't like something was going to get sticky or difficult to pull out. It's easy to just pop in the mouth when I was riding. So that's how I managed that. And I mixed my drinks a little bit diluted. So I wasn't at 100 grams in the drink. I was closer to like 70 grams because with the hydration pack, it's always a bit, wishy-washy. But I was closer to 70 grams there. And then I was taking in gels that was putting me closer to 90 to 100 grams throughout the whole time. And I did that because if it was really hot and you have something that if you really need to drink more, but it's pushing you up to like 130, 140, or maybe it's just pushing you to 90 grams and you're used to 80 or 70 grams, that's going to mess up your gut. So it's really helpful to look ahead. And if it's really hot, maybe dilute the mix a little bit and then take in gels to get your carbs. So then that way it allows you to drink more if you're thirsty and going through a ton of fluid through sweating. So hope that's helpful, applicable advice on nutrition. Also go to my Instagram. I just shared something on nutrition on there. Go to Amber's Instagram, Chad's, TrainerRoad's, give us a follow. Love to hear you guys. Okay, Todd's question. Is there any evidence to support wearing a base layer aiding with cooling when riding in hot conditions? Oh, Todd, you're asking the question that I've asked so many times. It's fantastic. And I've never thought to look into it deeper because Amber, like what's the point of wearing a base layer in hot conditions? Because it seems counterintuitive to me, right? To like wear another layer because it's hot. Can you kind of share the logic? And then Chad, I think that you even found some studies on this.
Well, what I've heard, and this is anecdotal, and this is what I've seen mostly around like branding and marketing efforts for companies that are selling base layers, is that it wicks the sweat away. It creates a layer of air so that, I don't know, it's a combination of evaporative and convective heat transfer, heat cooling. So that is my best guess as to what the logic would be behind this. That's kind of what people propose as being a mechanism for why this might work. That said, I tend to feel better with fewer layers, and I know Chad's got some actual studies on this to look at. So we're not going to do a deep dive on this, but we can kind of dig into it a little bit.
It's going to take a good turn at the end. Chad, go ahead.
Okay, so this typically just devolves or starts as anecdote and speculation because that's all we have, and that was kind of my attitude heading into looking for it. I mean, even when we were discussing this in our planning meeting, I started sifting through a whole lot of nothing. But just as I was about to call off the hunt, I did come across a 2013 study which discusses the impact of clothing on exercise in the heat. I mean, it's all there, right? And the beauty of that is that it looked at 14 studies prior to 2013 that did very much the same. So in one click of the mouse, I had 15 studies to work with.
Hey.
In general, clothing, and we're going to go through all 15 of them. I'm totally kidding. This will be quick. Okay, so the overall clothing plus skin creates a microenvironment. Okay, and this is affected by the fabric construction. So whether it's knitted or woven, how big it's woven or knitted, all the things. The design of the clothing, the cuffs, the size of the neck, the waist, etc. Air velocity and body movement are all contributors to what was termed pumping air in and out of this microenvironment. So the goal is to pump air in and out of the microenvironment you create with clothing, between clothing and your skin. So the first takeaway here is that the majority of the research over synthetic versus natural fabrics in this study, and the 14 that it looked at, noted that there was no difference in thermal regulation or clothing comfort. So no differences in heart rate, VO2, skin temperature, core temperature over a whole plethora of study designs. Some of them did have slight changes in those, but by and large, no differences. So the takeaway was that synthetic fabrics seem to offer no thermal balance advantage, was their term, over natural fabrics during exercise. In the more recent of those 14 studies anyway. Another takeaway, an important one, is that air velocity accounts for the majority of cooling, regardless of the fabric. This can be, and it depends, on how fast you're moving, anywhere from 5% to 46% of the cooling that takes place is all about air velocity. So the wind carries the warm air away via convective currents that Amber already mentioned, and the wind helps to evaporate sweat by increasing the evaporative gradient. So again, convection, evaporation. So the main takeaway is that from a cooling perspective, the fewer layers, the better. That's what everything boiled down to, because more layers actually complexify this whole microenvironment and creates multiples of it. So this just says to me that any more than a single layer doesn't really make sense in the context of cooling. Oof. And to bear that out, the second study, this was actually done just a year later, and it was cooling efficiency of one layer, tight-fitting sportswear in a hot environment. And this was a highly technical paper, way, way, way above my pay grade. I couldn't make sense of most of it, but what I could make sense of was the comparison of fabrics. They looked at Cool Max, which is a cross-section polyester fiber, merino wool, everybody drinks. I guess Jonathan didn't say it, so maybe not. Sports wool, which is a 50-50 blend of wool and polyester, and then cotton, just 100% cotton. And one thing they noted is that there's a linear decrease in the evaporative effect as sweat is transported from skin to clothing. So basically the distance from the skin to the point of condensation matters inside of the fabric, and the distance from the skin to the point of sweat evaporation matters, the outside of the fabric, all of which simply points to the thinner the fabric, the better. And they also made the point, news to no one, skin provides the most evaporative cooling. So when possible, short sleeves, wide necks, long zippers so that you can unzip. But when it comes to the fabric itself, the thinner the fabric, the better, as long as it's vapor permeable and moisture wicking. The two buzzy terms that most of these fabrics promise, and if they don't deliver, well, it could impact your cooling. And in the case of this study, this all pointed to the Cool Max and the Smart Wool as better fabrics for evaporative cooling. And I mentioned this study because it seems to be in stark opposition to the paper 1 year prior.
It's interesting.
Triathletes with sleeveless jerseys are just celebrating around the world now. Saying that, Chad.
Yeah. But then they put on arm sleeves and totally negate that effect. So.
I don't get arm sleeves. It's super confusing to me. Like runners that do it, they wear a singlet. They wear a singlet, and then, in indoor track races, they wear a singlet and they wear arm sleeves.
That makes sense.
Trying to understand
compression
for your arms.
In their arms.
Could work.
I don't know. Someone please help me understand.
Either way.
Yeah, it's a great look. Well, bare shoulders. It's the rage.
My husband broke his elbow not too long ago, and during PT he was wearing a compression sleeve, and he said it felt amazing. Like it was just amazing. So maybe there's something to do with RPE, and who knows?
Probably. Yeah. I wear compression socks for whenever I strength train, and it's nice in the winter just because it's warmer, but they feel good. So I end up wearing them year round.
Yeah. Nate makes fun of me for wearing them when we travel all the time.
It makes you an easy target. That's for sure. It's another good look.
Busy getting faster, people. Step off. Amber, let's talk. So basically to recap, Chad, this looks like these studies point to, and that review points to base layers not providing the claimed benefit for cooling. Right. If there's a layer of mesh or anything else in between your jersey and your skin, it's a complicated wind tunnel for that wind to travel through. So it might be flying in the very face of that evaporative cooling that you're hoping to get and the convective cooling effects that you get from air traveling over you. Amber, what are your thoughts on this?
It's just another form of, we're just looking at basic thermal regulation here, right? So in the heat, it's interesting when we talk about convective heat transfer, it's actually a combination. Convection itself is just the movement of fluid. So that's just the movement of air being a fluid. And then advection is the movement of something within that fluid. So in this case, we're looking at advective cooling is the movement of heat within the fluid. So advection can also refer to salinity, humidity, particulates. But when we're talking about heat and air, that's the advection. And then when we talk about convective heat transfer, it's actually a combination of two different words. Conduction, which is heat diffusion, and advection is the movement of heat by a fluid. So that convective heat transfer is conduction and advection. And so in order to get both of those, you need to be able to move some volume of air. And when you have a more complicated microenvironment there, it becomes harder to move bulk quantities of air and diffuse that heat. And in addition to that, we have the evaporative cooling, which is the evaporation of sweat off the skin. And that's also, those two things work in tandem to keep you cool in hot environments. So yeah, basic thermoregulation stuff makes sense based on what Chad noted in the studies. And yeah, kind of it tracks with anecdotal experience too.
Sure. I want to share one thing too. There can be a use in wearing arm sleeves or anything else or fabrics like this that can hold water, if particularly on run, like in triathlon and running, you'll see triathletes soak their clothing because that will aid in evaporative cooling, especially if they can get cold water onto that, because then that also can help cool the surface of their skin and really help. So that's why you'll see like somebody's even mentioning in the group chat, forgive me for missing the name on this, but David is mentioning this in the group chat. Christian Blumenfeld, once incredible triathlete. And he is a very data-driven person and goes about this in that way. And I think that he runs with sleeves and he does all that stuff because he's constantly soaking them. And then that is helping in his evaporative cooling. So there may be other reasons why you'd put a layer of clothing on your skin. Base layers, maybe not, but that layer that you're trying to cool down. The whole point is if you're running cooler, then you're going to be able to perform better, more efficiently. So if you get too hot, it's kind of rough. So yeah. Amber, did you ever do, can we talk about the snail thing? Can we do? Did you make base layers for snails?
Oh, so we better provide some context here quick. Yeah. This is getting confusing real fast. So when we were talking earlier about this topic, thermoregulation, I was joking because one of the papers I published as part of my research in school was a paper on thermoregulation in snails, which sounds hilarious, but it was super interesting looking at snail physiology. So these little invertebrates live in what's called the intertidal zone. So the zone where they are at sometimes submerged by high tide and at other times exposed at low tide. And that means that they are what's called a poikilotherm, which is that they experience huge excursions, huge ranges in body temperature. So they might be dry and exposed and baking in the sun on rocks, or they might be submerged in really, really cold ocean water. And they're really, really tiny little guys. And so they are very much at the mercy of the elements, and trying to figure out how they manage those huge ranges of temperature was interesting to me.
It's merino wool. That's the answer, by the way. They all have little merino wool sweaters. That's how they manage it.
Well, if anyone's interested, there is a phenomenon called homeoviscous adaptation. And what this means is your cell's membranes always function best within a very particular range of fluidity. So your cell membranes incorporate both hydrophobic and hydrophilic elements. So the hydrophobic elements are kind of oils and lipids. So just like butter versus olive oil, you can have more or less saturated lipids. So butter is a saturated fat, so it's hard at room temperature, whereas olive oil is unsaturated and it's liquid at room temperature. So the temperature of the environment actually affects the fluidity of your cell membranes, which for us is not too big of a deal because our body temperature is relatively constant. But for a teeny tiny little invertebrate who is experiencing these huge ranges of temperature, their little membranes can potentially become far more solid or far more liquid, depending on what their ambient temperature is. So we were looking to see how they were managing this, because we knew that mussels, so the mussels that you eat, seafood mussels, they also experience these huge ranges in temperature because they are also in the intertidal zone. They can actually completely restructure their membranes to be more or less saturated on the order of hours, so that they can compensate for these changes in temperature between tidal cycles, which is amazing, right? So cool. So we were trying to see if these snails did the same thing, and fascinatingly, they did not. So we hypothesized that they might be doing something with the metabolites and some of the electrolytes, perhaps, that were potentially stabilizing for the membrane. So there might be something in the interstitial fluid that helped to stabilize the membranes. We didn't get that far with the research, but it was super interesting to see how they were handling this. So super nerdy. We did not put undershirts on the snails, but that could have been interesting.
Please go back. That's your next, that's your next research for sure. Yeah. The more you know, snails.
Right.
What was the term again?
Homeoviscous adaptation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And you see this in bacteria. It's more common in smaller organisms, but definitely in poikilotherms. We are endotherms in, it's just super fun stuff.
So it wouldn't apply to muscle cells.
Or
would it?
Probably the temperature range is not going to be enough to perturbate the fluidity in the muscle cell membranes, but not in us. But you could look at different species of fish, for example, who might experience broader excursions in temperature. It's definitely possible. Yeah.
Look at us. Ask us a question on base layers and we end up on poikilotherms. So. And little sweaters for snails. Ken says, first, a huge thanks. Your tips on using 10-second power versus 3 seconds and on having lat power on the head unit during outside workouts help me absolutely nail a 3x12 steady state outside workout today. As a workout I always struggle with. I think the 10-second smoothing helped me tremendously to keep my power steady with the road undulations, and having lat power kept me focused on the interval, not the small changes in power. And it was awesome. So way to go. Way to go, Ken. Take your workouts outside. It's the best way to do it. You'll keep getting faster all throughout the whole year. If you can do it, fantastic. Go to TrainerRoad.com, give it a shot. Try it out. Try adaptive training and see how much faster it's going to make you for your spring and summer races. I guarantee you it will. And if not, I have to give you your money back. So give it a shot. Okay. Ken says, I've never really had any coaching on pedaling dynamics. I added strength training in November and definitely am a stronger rider due to the strength training. But when you talk about pedaling techniques, muscle groups and all of that, I feel totally clueless. I don't have good awareness. Like when you talk about things like when your quads stop firing, you need to use your glutes and the like. I'm sure there is important improvement I could get on technique here, but where do I start? So I see like the one problem with probably the first thing to address is proprioception. You've mentioned that before on the podcast. Can you break down what that is and how Ken could develop that with the pedal stroke here, Amber? And then Chad, we can get into like some basic drills to help him build awareness even further.
Yeah. I mean, first off, I would say keep it simple. You don't have to get too complex with this to make it very, very effective. But proprioception is just, we have different ways of sensing our environment. And one of our senses is referred to as proprioception. And that's just the sense of where your body is in space. So I can have my hand out here behind me and it's not within my field of view, but if I close my eyes or, I don't even have to close my eyes because I can't see where my hand is. I have some idea of where my hand is in space relative to what's around me. Right. So that's the sense of proprioception, and that can apply to where your body is in space, but it can also apply more internally to, which muscles you're engaging when and how that's interacting through your pedal stroke. So that's one aspect of this. And again, you can really get granular on this and break it way down, but that's not necessarily going to translate to the outcomes that you want. So let's start with the outcomes that you want, which is you want to have an efficient pedal stroke and an efficient pedaling technique. And I'm going to toss it over to Chad for that part.
It's an excellent setup, because really we could look at it from a couple of perspectives. One being that we just want to improve proprioception around the pedal stroke so that you're not a masher, so you don't just drive the foot down and then just hope for the best. One foot carries the other, and there's no real coordination to it, because as you improve that coordination, argue it all you want, your efficiency is going to increase. When you have muscles that fire and then turn off, and other muscles that turn on when they actually contribute rather than resist the motion, you're going to get an improvement in biomechanical efficiency. And that's probably going to translate to aerobic efficiency. And all these things are a win. But really, if you want to distill it down, all I'm after with pedal stroke drills, all anyone is really after with quadrant drills or pedal efficiency drills, whatever you want to name them, is just the least amount of work for your watts. If you can put out 200 watts and you're flailing all over the place and hemorrhaging just energy and using more oxygen than is necessary and more glycogen and all the fuels, or you could just learn over time and practice to pedal just a little more, less resistively, more coordinatedly. That's it. That's all we're after. And to boot, adding efficiency drills to any workout that's monotonous in any way is just one form of productive distraction. It's just another way for you to make it more useful and not stare at the clock or just want it to be over, or just wonder why today 240 watts feels so much harder than it did 3 days ago. So it is, again, productive distraction is always at the head of the list for quadrant drills and pedal efficiency drills.
Yeah. One thing that I've found with proprioception is you can practice it at any point. Like I was just practicing it with the arches of my feet just now. I was thinking, contract the arch of my foot and do it on the left side, then do it on the right. And it's different. It feels different on the right than it does on the left. I can't do it as much on the right. So but it's a great example. You can just do this when you're at work, when you're doing anything. Just work on trying to contract individual muscles. And as silly as that sounds, if you spend time doing that, that's one of like the great things with yoga or meditation as well. A lot of the time they'll have you work on proprioception in these meditative routines to be able to build that awareness, that body awareness you have. And it can go a really long way just to helping you say, oh, hey, like my hamstring is like really firing at the same time that my quads are in a weird way. It doesn't feel very efficient. I can change that. And that's what Chad's getting to and talking about efficiency. But if you don't spend time just thinking about those connections, I know it sounds weird, but thinking is productive in this case, because that's you establishing these connections. Yeah. Then it's tough to happen. And this is quadrant drills. Another great example. You don't want to be doing quadrant drills when your workout, and you can do them, like Chad said, as a convenient distraction. But if you're barely making it through your workouts, if the distraction helps, do it. If it complicates it, don't do it. Right. Quadrant drills, I do them all the time on the bike. I'm always taking time to think about that. But during my efforts, I'm typically not. I try to spend that during my recoveries, during my lower intensity rides. I really work a lot on that. And then that helps form my pedal stroke for when I am pedaling hard.
And they're useful and they're easy to introduce. I mean, they're super straightforward. You can be doing a VO2 max interval the last 3 minutes and just decide that I'm going to focus for this 30 seconds on driving down with my left knee. And then I'm going to switch that focus. And just that polite little interruption of your attention that would normally be devoted to how each minute is so much harder than the one that preceded it is now steered just a little off that course so that you're doing something, again, productively distracting. But it doesn't, and those are the subtler drills. And I think when these come under criticism, it typically has to do with single leg drills or individual leg training where you got one leg out. And these really have their place more than any other. This is one you have to be very selective with. And honestly, I really only like to employ those in the very earliest stages of training. And in subsequent years, you may not need them at all. And I won't say only, but the primary reason I like them is they shine a light on how uncoordinated one side of the body probably is and how the other side of the body is compensating for that. So once you see it, then it's a little easier to address it with subtler drills. Like, instead of taking a leg out and pedaling one-legged, now you just shift focus to one leg. Now I know my left leg kind of flails a bit. So I'm really going to focus my attention on my left leg because my right has it down pat. And over time, it may not seem like they do much, but anything we do on the bike is magnified or repeated hundreds, thousands, over time, millions of times. So just a little added focus to the same repetitive, pretty controlled movement. I mean, we are locked into a pedal seated on a bike saddle. It's only going to vary so much, but little tiny improvements is all we're after because they can carry weight.
I wanted to add something like tangential, but very much related to this. If your pedal stroke just goes more and more progressively more wild, uncontrolled, not disciplined as power goes up, which by the way is normal for all of us, but it's easy to let that creep in where it shouldn't, that lack of control. One thing I always ask myself if I'm riding at VO2, because whenever riding at VO2 pace, I don't know about anybody else, but I always think, man, what if this is my FTP? That would be cool, huh? Like if I could just ride, like instead of 120%, it was just 100%. And I was doing these same watts and I could just hold them. That would be awesome. And a lot of the time when I'm doing VO2 work like that, I'll catch myself thrashing around a bit on the bike. Maybe not putting my pelvis where it should be, maybe not even paying attention whatsoever into whether I am activating my muscles in a productive and efficient manner. And instead I'm just mashing my pedals around. How am I going to get to the point where I can sustain that power if anytime I get to that power, I'm just losing all discipline?
Well, sadly, I think I think that flailing actually gets kind of glorified too. I mean, it implies that you're working really hard. So everyone around you can see I'm working really hard right now. And then watch commercials for, I won't name any names here, but other services, spin classes are a good example. And they have people that are just gutting it out and they're all over the bike. The message seeming to be that I need to do this in order to work this hard. But we all know best bike racers in the world hemorrhage no energy. I mean, you watch anybody, but Tadej Pogačar take off at Strade Bianche. I mean, it doesn't even look like the fella's working. He just sails up the hill as though he hasn't changed anything. He looks just the same, yet he's probably doubled his wattage and is on the brink of death. I mean, he's suffering dearly, but he exudes such control.
Yes, it's true. And when you think about that, if you force yourself to work on those mechanics at those higher power levels and be sound and be calm and be able to produce that power from a very planted and stable position, that's only going to help you get to the point where it becomes more sustainable over time. If you let yourself thrash every time the power goes up, it's going to be tougher. Like I really do think that it's just going to be tougher to do. Once again, when we're talking about like efficiency being something that's so important when you're pedaling, especially around threshold intensities, because you're on the limit, pay attention, like Chad said, to what you're selling yourself, because you're not just selling it to others. You might just be training alone. Are you selling the effort to yourself that it's so hard that you need to do this? It's probably increasing RPE. Could you sell the effort a bit differently to yourself? Could you say, make this look easy, like Chad says in the workout text? And then as a result, just change your perspective on the whole thing. They're like we're talking about icing on the cake. Doing the work is the important part, but this icing can have like a profound effect on the whole cake. It can really change it, change that perspective, calm down when the power is super high and just focus on putting down the power well and appropriately. It goes a long way. Really
It is an interesting point though, because it has to impact RPE. I mean, it has to. There's no way that you start moving like that and you're not in the moment convincing yourself this is horrible, this is so hard. Whereas if you just dialed it back and became Tadej for whatever 2 more minutes,
your anemia,
your RPE would come down. It would have to. I can't imagine otherwise.
Yeah. An interesting one game that I play with myself on efforts like that when I'm trying to maintain a controlled looking pedal stroke, even though it doesn't feel controlled, but I'm still maintaining an efficient pedal stroke, is I'll just focus on one muscle group at a time. So maybe I'll spend 30 seconds thinking about, okay, quads, like let's really drive it from the quads right now. And then I'll switch to, okay, now let's really pull with the hamstrings, have that super smooth hamstring transition. And then I might really focus on glutes. Like, okay, I'm really going to fire my glutes on this one. And sometimes just mentally, I mean, I'm probably not using that muscle that much more, but just by mentally focusing on one, it almost convinces myself, I almost convince myself that I'm giving the other muscles a break, which I'm definitely not, but it helps to train that proprioception a little bit, but it also kind of gives this, like, I don't know, it's a little mental game that I play with myself. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'm just using my hamstrings now, so my quads are totally resting. Not true, but it's fun.
Whatever it takes, right? And it has an effect. Yeah. This is why go onto our YouTube channel, look at the live ramp test, and you'll never know when Chad is close to like tapping out in the ramp test or if he's just soft pedaling. Chad's like one of the most stable, stoic pedalers I've seen. So it's pretty awesome.
It's beneficial in terms of efficiency, but also beneficial tactically, because people don't know if and when you're suffering. And one of the things that you'll look for in a race is somebody's tell. So you can usually people are pretty careless with this, and you can look at them and know in an instant whether they're suffering or not. And sometimes it's to your benefit to look like you're fresh when you're not. It's also sometimes to your benefit to look like you're suffering when you're not. But to be able to have that as another tool in your tactical toolkit is pretty awesome. And one of the things we used to refer to was ghost speed, which is where you would just accelerate suddenly, but there would be nothing about your body language that would betray it. So no one would see it coming. There wouldn't be a tell, and suddenly you've just opened up this massive gap, and no one saw that coming because you didn't shift and click down to a couple more gears. You didn't do a big adjustment on your saddle or tighten your shoes. You just suddenly were gone. And it's a great skill to train.
Yeah, really is. Good talk, team. I like that one. Ross says, when I'm just about to hit that penultimate interval with tired legs and the recovery time quickly ticking down, I'll often listen to upbeat music to get in the zone and picture myself smashing the rest of the peloton as I cruise to my maiden stage victory. With this anticipation, I can actually see my heart rate increase before I've even started the hard work. So am I doing myself a disservice by mentally priming myself? Surely increasing my own heart rate gives me less, and he says in quotes, space to go when the hard work actually begins. And then he says, so yeah, anyways, recommendation. He says we have a top podcast, and he also recommends Peak Challenge. Peaks Challenge, what we talked about in Australia.
Yes.
Yeah, Ross, could be awesome. It's an interesting concept because like getting revved up, getting in the zone, getting pumped up, whatever term you want to use for a race, it typically will come with elevated heart rate to a certain extent. And then the theory here is that, well, if I'm elevating it coming in, then does that give me less to work with once I start the work? Logical question when I'm thinking through it like that. What do y'all think on this?
Just with that, I don't want to, excuse me, I don't want to trash talk heart rate again, but it has its utility for sure. It's useful typically after the fact or, over a long term, but this is just another one of its limitations. If you based everything on heart rate, you'd go into any race thinking I'm already as wound up as I can get. This is not going to go well. Or that you're somehow getting something wrong when in fact you're just excited. And that's a necessary component really of high level competition. So it's just another opportunity for something to get in your head that really in the moment doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, this is kind of like the point of it, right, Amber? Like this is a part of the response that should be going on in your body.
Yeah, this is like a sympathetic priming response. So your body is responding in exactly the way you're hoping it will. You want to get yourself psyched up for that last interval. That's how your body psychs itself up. And I don't think it's going to do anything to shoot you in the foot on that last interval. If nothing else, it's going to help you be in a good mental, psychological state to really attack it. And yeah, the music is pulling that out. You see that biological response happening as well, which is pretty cool to watch in real time. But don't let it freak you out or make you think that somehow you're going to underperform on that last interval as a result. No, it's just your body responding in exactly the way that you were hoping to.
Yeah, let's think mechanically about it, right? Increased heart rate means you're going to have increased circulation throughout your body. That's not a bad thing. You aren't increasing your work rate when you do this. Your heart's pumping more, sure, but your heart can do a whole lot of amazing things. So don't worry about that. In this case, if it's just getting your muscles more ready, pumping more blood, getting things fresher, doing all that stuff, it's only good. That's how it works. So it's a good thing. This is why it's really important. Like I don't really, when I'm training and particularly when I'm racing, I don't care what my heart rate's doing during the interval. I just care what my power is doing. Afterward, I can look at it and I can glean insights. But boy, if I did that all the time, I would come up with conclusions about exactly how this workout is going to go that would be misleading many times. And in many cases, most cases, limit me unnecessarily. So it's a tricky thing when you put too much credence into it. So once again, I'm sorry, Chad, for jumping on the train of bagging on heart rate in this regard, but it's useful, but boy, it can have its limitations. So no, in this case, Ross, keep pumping yourself up there. Honestly, once again, it really helps lower RPE. That visualization of you achieving something great, that can go a long way to helping you lower RPE so that the impact of your workouts is less day to day to day. And thusly you can be more consistent day to day to day. That's cool. Joey says, I have two questions. Off the back of your recent discussion on flexibility, mobility, and strength, what would the TrainerRoad team recommend off the bike to improve one's ability to hold an aero position on the bike? This would be alongside using said position more whilst on the bike. And then he also asked another question related to this. Does the TrainerRoad team see any benefits for cyclists and endurance athletes in extreme isometric holds? He says in quotes, example, given an isometric lunge hold. It's particularly appealing due to the lack of equipment needed to perform this exercise. Joey, this question's from Joey. Chad, TT position. You mentioned that this perked your interest earlier.
Yeah, it did, because it helped me recall. And first off, let's omit the extreme aspect of this. Isometrics don't need to be extreme. Nothing really does.
Yeah. What is the extreme one?
You're just holding a position. It can become extreme in your mind because it just gets progressively more painful. So maybe that's what he's referring to. But this helped me recall a 2012 paper that I wish had been a 2006 paper, so that I could have leaned into my own isometric training back in the days where I was actually good at time trialing. And this is 2012, and I probably didn't find it till just a couple of years ago. So this is quite simply, it just reinforces what my belief already was, and that there are benefits of isometric strength training. And in this paper in particular, it drives it home in that it shows that it can rapidly, and this was over the course of a single week, decrease the oxygen cost of cycling at moderate intensity. So, most of the riding you're going to do, the longer the event becomes, is going to be at moderate intensity. And if you can drive down even the slightest bit the oxygen cost, it's a beneficial thing. So that's just a paper that's been in the back of my mind and always made me think, wow, isometrics are good, and didn't really need to think any deeper on it. But having brought this up and having employed isometrics in the past, and having had a very solid position on the bike, even in time trial position, and be able to drive power into the ground rather than my bike or my bike, just body movement. This resonates with me, and I dug into it just a little bit, just so I could paint isometrics with a fair, or portray them fairly, in that they are actually way more than people acknowledge them or credit them for being. And I linked to that 2012 paper, but a 2019 brief review, and maybe Amber can tell us what a brief review is. It looked like a plenty long review to me on the effects of isometric strength training on strength and dynamic performance. So just, how do isometrics carry over to, strength gains and dynamic performance, where you're actually moving and not static. And just a handful of takeaways. And one is the isometric strength training. And so we're clear, isometrics are just holding a position. So the length of the muscle stays the same. The tension can vary. You can position yourself in a number of positions, but once you're in that position, you stay in that position. There's no change in the length of the muscle. So it induces less fatigue than dynamic. So where you're moving with concentrics and eccentrics, and you're moving in and out of position, all the while enhances neuromuscular adaptation the same way. So you get that same brain muscle connection that you would get, or at least similar, with less fatigue by simply holding a position. So to put it really simply, it's less energy demands, really. Though not short on intensity. Anyone who's done isometrics, just do a wall sit up against a wall and tell me that doesn't become plenty intense the longer you stay there. Another takeaway is that it can increase muscle hypertrophy, maximum strength, muscle endurance. These are all the things you pursue when you do strength training of any form. And all you have to do is tweak the intensity or the duration of the repetitions. So they're really quite powerful. You just have to learn how to wield them. And this paper gives you many, many suggestions. It's a really good paper. Third takeaway is that it's excellent. And this is to this question specifically, it's excellent at improving joint specific strength. So if you want this position in TT, I would commonly do just body planks, elbows on the floor, and you look like you're in the push-up position, but you're on your elbows, right? So just a regular plank. And I'd bring my elbows in tight to where they would be on the aero bars, and just kind of simulate that position and just do long holds. Long holds, you get up to the point where you're doing them for 5-6 minutes at a time. That's a long time to hold a plank. But the carryover is amazing. But what's even more amazing is that you don't just get stronger in that position, but you get stronger in positions near those joint angles, and even well outside of them in some cases. So it actually translates to a bigger range of motion than you might anticipate, considering you're not moving. And then finally, isometric strength training might actually provide similar cycling performance benefits as dynamic strength training modes. And again, it does it with less toll on the brain and the body. So less neuromuscular fatigue, less actual muscle fatigue. And the point is simply is that this particular mode of strength training can be a really good fit for endurance athletes who commonly seek to improve strength, but don't want to add muscle mass.
Good stuff,
Super
Chad.
interesting.
Yeah.
Right on.
Amber, do you have anything to add on that one? I don't.
I would just follow it up with saying mobility work would be really helpful on this as well. So when you're in that, if you're talking about a TT position and being in aero bars, you are really stabilizing with your lats and your scapulas, and you want to make sure that you're maintaining really nice scapular mobility, because that's going to help you with breathing in that position. So it's not just about being stable in that position. So if you're really doing a lot of planks, you could really lock in that position and not have great mobility there, even if you can hold a plank for a really long time. But you want to make sure you have really good scapular mobility, which is going to help with rib mobility, and that's going to help you be able to do that really nice belly breathing in that position.
Thoracic mobility as well.
Exactly. You want to really be able to hold that position, but be able to breathe well in it as well. So thoracic mobility, scapular mobility, all of those things are going to help you with breathing, ventilation. And then the other thing I would say is a hamstring, because you're bending forward in that position. So you need to be able to produce a lot of power at a narrowed hip angle. And that's one of the cruxes of being in that aerodynamic position. And that applies whether you're in your aero bars or in your drops. And so you want to make sure that your glute mobility is good, hamstring mobility helps, and all of that kind of QL work as well can be QLs being your quadratus lateralis?
Lumborum.
Sorry. Lumborum. Thank you. Alphabet soup.
Just call them QLs. Your hip
QLs.
hitchers.
Hip hitchers, right. So all of those things are going to serve to having good mobility in those areas are going to serve to help you produce power in that position. Because again, just being able to get in that position is one thing, but being able to produce power in that position is a whole different ballgame. So I would encourage just really good general mobility work with maybe some extra focus in those areas.
Awesome. Last question from Micah. It's about cold and cramping. He says, early season road racing has begun in Colorado. This time of year, races can be chilly with high temperatures in the 40s. And this early in the season, I tend to cramp more easily than later in the season. And with the colder temperatures, my body finds it challenging to feel how hard I am working. In other words, I don't feel the burn or recognize the effort I am putting out unless I look at heart rate and power. And he says in his theory, because he's cold. So if you were to take an educated guess as to the reasons, could the cramp be more due to conditioning this early in the season, or not being able to feel how much effort I'm putting down during the race, or does temperature have a direct effect on cramping? Thanks. Looking forward to warmer temperatures. He also goes on to say that he takes in 90 to 100 grams of carbohydrate and that he checks some boxes in terms of, making sure he's adequately fueled, because we've covered that. Cramping is not caused by one specific thing. It could be caused by many different things. Chad, what do you find on this one?
Well, in the vein of an educated guess, that's what this is going to be, and we're going to focus on the cold aspect of this, which is really what the question is. So just a couple studies. One was a 2021 randomized controlled trial that looked at cold packs and the application of them to the rectus femoris, which is one of your quadriceps. And they would have people endure the cold packs for 10, 12, 15, or 20 minutes on the RM. And they would look at skin temperature, muscle tone, and stiffness. And then they took measures at 5 minutes post or immediately after, and 5 minutes, 10, 15, 20, and 30 minutes post exposure. Okay. And all of them saw an increase in the muscle tone and stiffness, a decrease in its elasticity with the cooling. But if they cut it off at 10 to 12 minutes, they had a return to normal within about 5 to 15 minutes. But if they carried the exposure out to 15 to 20 minutes, the muscle stiffness simply continued through all time points. Even at 30 minutes, the muscles still weren't back to normal. So the function was still on the decline, something they termed as biomechanically corrupted. So the point is with continued exposure to cold, muscle function in this case just worsened and worsened. So I think the takeaway is that depending on the riding temperatures, your leg insulation, the amount of wind, the amount of pedaling you do, coasting, it's possible to suffer a similar spiral, to some degree. And so that's point number one. And then the other study I looked at was an Australian study from 2008 that looked at how muscle power can decline along with muscle temperature. And that's news to nobody, but it was important or informative in that it showed that there's a cutoff really, because cooling can be a good thing until it's not. So moderate muscle cooling typically results in unimpaired or enhanced muscle function. But if you cross that threshold, you end up both slowing the enzymatic processes, which are super important when you're turning over a lot of energy in an aerobic sport, and slows nerve conduction, both of which lead to impairments in the rate of force development, which is super important when you're pushing the pedals, and it likely reduces muscle endurance. That's the conclusion of this paper. And what was especially interesting is that the greater the extent of cooling and the greater the power required, the greater the decrement in power. So the colder it is, the colder your muscles get, the bigger the power hit you face as you try to work harder and harder. And, one of the theories behind cramping is that it might result from overtaxing the muscles over long durations. So it makes sense to me that if you're trying to eke out the usual watts out of cold muscles, you could be setting yourself up for muscle cramps.
Interesting.
One of the many things that could affect it, right?
Yeah.
I'm stuck on biomechanically corrupted. I love that.
Me too.
Good term, right?
That's exactly what every time I have a bad day on the bike now, it's just I was biomechanically corrupted.
Can't do it today. Everything's biomechanically.
Mine's are in the same spot. I was like,
I love that.
Complaining like a scientist sounds way more justifiable.
Right? It totally does.
Yeah.
Why'd you get dropped? I was biomechanically corrupted.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to have to head out early. Muscles are
biomechanically corrupted. Wow. Okay. That sounds bad. Take care of yourself, right? Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks. Thanks for this episode. Is awesome. Amber, thanks for the snail thing. We hope you enjoyed those fun little asides. Chad, thanks for sharing all the stuff that you did on all the science that you dug into this week. We appreciate you as always. You're awesome. If you appreciate this podcast, which we hope you do, go to trainerroad.com and sign up. You can go to Spotify, rate this podcast, and share it with your friends. Sharing is the best way you can help us. I promise you, it just goes a long way, and we really appreciate it. So share Trainer Road and share the podcast with other people. We need more ratings on Spotify, so go there, rate it 5 stars, share it with other people. This is how we grow. We appreciate you all. Submit your questions at trainerroad.com/podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.